Is Shane Beamer replicating a part of Jim Harbaugh's blueprint that he used in his latter years at Michigan? He just might be.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and you can also find my written work over on Gamecock Digest on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team every day. We are free and available, as always, wherever you get your audio podcasts daily and also on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. We got a lot to touch on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. We're going to talk about a potential trend or maybe mere coincidence that has developed when it comes to the losses that Lamont Paris and the men's basketball team have suffered this season. We're also going to talk about some of the summer official visits that have been set with the football team and why the timing of these official visits are notable. But we're going to start off today's show with what I think is going to be a very interesting conversation. We're going to talk about how Shane Beamer just might be trying to replicate part of the blueprint that Jim Harbaugh used at Michigan over the past few years, especially when it comes to the coaching moves that he has made so far this offseason. The blueprint, you might ask? Basically, Shane Beamer is hiring guys who want to see South Carolina succeed or guys that he can trust to help them get to that point of success, whatever that point of success might be. Now, let's start off with the context surrounding Jim Harbaugh and what all he changed with his program up at Michigan over the past few years before obviously now leaving for the head coaching job with the Los Angeles Chargers. Obviously, the 2020 COVID season was a bad one for Michigan. They went 2-4. They did not look good even in the wins that they had, and it was about the second or third year in a row that Michigan seemed to be on sort of the downturn. And so Jim Harbaugh saw his contract get restructured where the buyout was lowered a significant degree, and he was basically sent the message that, you know, it's time for you to prove yourself. You've had plenty of time now to get things turned around here, to make this a pillar of stability in this sport, and you got to show us. What are you going to do to try to change everything that's gone wrong with this program over the past couple years? And so that offseason, Jim Harbaugh, he got to work, and he hired a lot of quote-unquote Michigan men. He hired former Michigan running back Mike Hart to be the running backs coach. He hired former Michigan wide receiver Ron Bellamy to be the safeties coach. And he also hired former Michigan offensive lineman Courtney Morgan to become the director of player personnel for Michigan's football program. And when doing the research for today's show, I came across an article from The Athletic. It was written by Austin Mich and Nick Baumgardner back on September 1st, 2021. If you have the money, if you have the account over with The Athletic and you haven't read that article, highly recommend you go and do so. It's a very good in-depth piece on all the changes Jim Harbaugh made. But to be fair to those guys, I'm not going to give you much because you do have to pay for a subscription for this, but I will give you one quote that this article did have that I think that you can apply to Shane Beamer and the kind of changes he's made this offseason. Here's the quote. The feeling from those close to Michigan's program, especially those who have known Harbaugh for years, is that he finally has the right staffing mix of recruiting aptitude, energy, and a desire to put Michigan ahead of anything else. And I think that you can apply all of these to multiple hires that Shane Beamer has made this offseason with this coaching staff. So let's start off with the one that I think Gamecock fans will want to hear the most. The desire to put South Carolina ahead of anything else. In my opinion, there are two guys that fit the billing here. The first one is obviously Shawn Elliott. Shawn Elliott talked to the media on Tuesday afternoon. I was there at that press conference, and it was just very easy to see how happy Shawn Elliott is to be back here with South Carolina's football program. He calls this place his home. He grew up in Camden, South Carolina, not far down the road from Columbia, and also has a previous coaching stint here. So clearly, Shawn Elliott is a guy, maybe just as much as Shane Beamer, he wants to see the Gamecocks succeed in college football. The other guy that I throw into this category, maybe not to the same degree as a Shawn Elliott, but I still feel like that a part of him really wants to help this program grow, is Joe DeCamillis. Joe DeCamillis, what's the connection here? Well, his late father-in-law was Dan Reeves, who played for South Carolina all the way back in the 1960s, turned out to be a very successful football player at the next level, and then a very successful head coach in the NFL. And when he was introduced to South Carolina football fans and media members not that long ago, he talked about how Dan Reeves would have conversations with him about South Carolina's football program and how he called this place special, and he talked about this place constantly with him. And so Joe DeCamillis, through the late Dan Reeves, he got an idea of how this place is just viewed a little bit differently than a lot of other places. The fans here are different. The energy here is different. The want to succeed, the willingness to sacrifice because you want the ultimate success. It is different at South Carolina than most other places. And so I think both of those guys, they're going to put South Carolina first. When they are out there recruiting, when they're out there representing the university, when they're out there coaching on Saturdays or on the practice fields, they're going to put South Carolina first. Now, in terms of energy, I put the same two guys, Shawn Elliott and Joe DeCamillis. Shawn Elliott, again, if you have seen any videos or seen any audio clips, heard any audio clips of Shawn Elliott in the past, you don't need me to tell you, the guy would probably make you want to run through a brick wall, or at least attempt to. Shawn Elliott always brings the juice. He certainly does not lack it. And sure, as he mentioned on Tuesday, he might not exactly roughhouse around with some of the football players like he used to when he was younger, because as he put it, you feel those hits a little bit more when you're 50-something than you do when you're in your 30s. But he's still going to make those guys want to fight their tails off every time they're out there. He's just that kind of coach. He makes you believe in yourself and believe in what you are doing. And then Joe DeCamillis, I think this is something that South Carolina fans are going to grow to like when they get to see Joe DeCamillis on the football field. And obviously, I haven't even seen him in a practice setting yet. None of us have seen him in a practice setting. So none of us truly know yet what he's going to bring, but you go back and look at some of his clips, some of his audio sound bites when he was with the Los Angeles Rams, Jacksonville Jaguars, a couple different franchises in the NFL, and you could just see energy is one of the things that he is going to bring. And obviously, it's a different kind of energy when you're dealing with adults and guys that are making a lot of money, not just like a couple tens of thousands of dollars, like millions to play the game of football, and they are treating it like it is a full-time job, versus college athletes who, sure, can make money now through NIL, but obviously it's just not the same thing as getting a contract from a franchise in the National Football League. Either way, I think both of those guys are going to bring the energy. Recruiting aptitude, this one's also easy. James Coley, a guy that has been seasoned on the recruiting trail for several years now, brought in several blue chip prospects everywhere he has been. 4-star talent, 5-star talent from all over the place, especially the state of Florida. South Carolina needed a boost at the wide receiver position when it came to recruiting. Shane Beamer got James Coley from Texas A&M, did not get retained by the new staff over there, and so he's hoping he's going to change that. Also, James Coley is a guy, along with Shawn Elliott and Joe DeCamillis through their relationships with Beamer, that Beamer is going to trust. And I think it's a big reason why running back coach Marquell Blackwell wound up getting hired by Shane Beamer, because he worked alongside James Coley for a year or two. And I think that James Coley kind of got in Beamer's ear and said, hey, listen, this guy is a really good football coach. I saw his work at Texas A&M. You want him on your staff. If you want a new running backs coach, go get him. And Beamer trusted him. At least that's how it seems like all that went down. So Beamer is getting guys that love South Carolina, a guy like Shawn Elliott, and someone who understands how special this place is in Joe DeCamillis. He's also getting guys that he trusts. Obviously, Shawn Elliott and Joe DeCamillis, that goes without saying, along with a James Coley, and he's letting those guys do their own job. And he's also allowing them to make suggestions, which I'm not trying to insinuate that in the past that was different with Shane Beamer, but I think you can see how Shane Beamer has evolved and adapted as a coach over time with the kind of hires that he's making. And again, as I said before when I talked about Beamer and Harbaugh and the similarities between the two of them, I'm not saying that Shane Beamer is going to all of a sudden go to the college football playoff and win multiple national titles or conference titles. I'm not saying that at all. Heck, this might end up going up in smoke. Shane Beamer still might not end up working out at South Carolina a couple years down the road. Who knows how this is all going to play out? But my point here is the guy is trying. He seems like that he's at least trying to make the effort to get things back on track and knows that the 2024 season is a big year for him, not just for himself, but also for this football program with the changing landscape, not just in the sport, but in the SEC itself. South Carolina cannot afford to have a second straight down year in a row. They got to get back on the right footing, and Shane Beamer, it seems like, is trying to do that, trying to accomplish that with all these new hires that he has made. And thus, he might be replicating part of that blueprint that Jim Harbaugh used to get things back on track with the Michigan Wolverines a couple seasons ago. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not that is the case. Now, sticking with football for the next couple of minutes, we're going to talk about some official visits and why the timing of these official visits are quite intriguing compared to what we saw the program do this past summer on the recruiting trail. We'll dive into all of that in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. South Carolina's women's basketball team's got a big game on Thursday night against the Alabama Crimson Tide, but it's not the matchup itself that's big. It's the implications of what a win could do here for South Carolina. If the Gamecocks win this game, they'll clinch two things: an SEC regular season title and career win number 600 for Dawn Staley, putting her in an elite company, an elite group in women's college basketball. The cheapest ticket in the upper bowl is $26. The cheapest ticket in the lower bowl is $64. Prices are going up, so you don't want to wait long. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily choice for South Carolina Gamecock sports coverage. South Carolina's football program is beginning to set official visits with a bevy of big-time talented prospects in the 2025 recruiting class. And the interesting thing here is a lot of these official visits that are being set up right now are being set up in late May and early June, which could be signaling a change in strategy, at least for this cycle, for Shane Beamer and the football program. Now, for the past couple of years, Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks, they have tried to get the majority of these uncommitted prospects that they knew they were in the game for to a significant degree, on the final weekend of June. The thought process was pretty simple. Get them in for the last official visit of the summer period and just knock it out of the park and get their commitment either later that month or in the month of July. That was the whole strategy in essence. Now, in 2023, this strategy turned out to be a bit of a mixed bag for South Carolina because they had three big-time uncommitted targets that were here for official visits on the final weekend of June last cycle. Those guys were Dylan Stewart, Jonathan Paylor, and Daniel Hill. Now, South Carolina obviously still wound up getting Dylan Stewart in this class, which obviously great big deal for them. The highest rated signing out of the entire 2024 class that they had. But they did not get Jonathan Paylor. We all know what happened not long after that. All of a sudden, NC State miraculously took the lead for him and then got him for a cookout visit. And then Daniel Hill, obviously that recruitment is a lot more complicated than I'm sort of making it out to be in this segment, but you get the point here. South Carolina only landed one of those guys, and batting .333 when it comes to these kind of official visits, that's not a percentage that you want to be located at if you're South Carolina. So Just in the past couple of days, in the last week or so, 6 guys have locked in official visits with South Carolina. 4-star linebacker Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, 4-star edge rusher Tayshawn Alston, and 3-star wide receiver Malik Clark. Those 3 guys are all scheduled to visit the weekend of May the 31st through June the 2nd. Basically, that is the first weekend that official visits can take place. As a matter of fact, looking back at this past summer, I don't think South Carolina had a single official visitor that was in Columbia in late May, while some of their rivals, some of their closest rivals in football especially, Georgia and Clemson and maybe another school or two, were hosting kids on campus starting as early as late May. So that's one interesting change right there. South Carolina now, they're not going to sit back and wait for some of these guys to come to their campus or hope that they will stay committed and come to their campus on the final weekend official visits in June. They're going to try to go after these guys a little bit earlier than they did last year. And then the weekend of June 7th through the 9th, we see the same deal. 4-star safety target Jonte Gilbert will be in town, along with 4-star linebacker Jared Smith and 4-star offensive line target Juan Gaston. So, South Carolina, they're already getting a bunch of highly notable prospects, national level prospects on campus, scheduled to be on campus in the first couple weeks that summer official visits will be taking place. The other thing to note here is this. This does seem like a cycle where South Carolina is not going to start really landing a lot of these guys until potentially April or May. Obviously, they've got Jaden Sellers in the fold as of right now. Might have another guy or two in their recruiting class. I'll just be completely honest. If they do, I cannot think of them at this very moment in time. But we all remember this past cycle. South Carolina got to January, they started landing kids left and right. Kids like Cam Pringle, Michael Smith at tight end, Mazo Bennett wide receiver, so on and so forth. And the ball just got rolling immediately as the new year kicked off. Has it been the same case this year? I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But again, you can see whether it's that or the lack of success they had with big-time uncommitted targets late last summer, why South Carolina is stacking the first couple weekends that official visits are going to be taking place this coming summer. You can see why they are doing this. So keep an eye out on this trend. If you got a favorite recruiting target from this 2025 class, who knows? They might also wind up getting to campus May 31st through June 2nd or the weekend following that. So that's going to be something to watch moving forward on the recruiting trail. Now, we're going to switch gears and talk about men's basketball for a couple minutes to end today's show. And we're not going to talk about anything in terms of the team's on-court play. We're going to talk about a potentially interesting trend, or maybe, just maybe, a mere coincidence when it comes to the timing of the losses that South Carolina has suffered to this point in the season. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet right now on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. New customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Again, that's $150 if your bet wins. On Thursday night, we got a very interesting game taking place between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors will be the home team in this matchup, and they're also 4.5-point favorites as set by the odds makers over at FanDuel. Now, LeBron James is currently beat up a bit with an ankle injury right now, and the Lakers are 11-17 on the road to this point in the season. But the Warriors are a mere 500 ball club at home. So if LeBron is playing in this game, the Lakers might have a shot to pull off the upset. If you think that's the case, or maybe you want to check out some other games or some of your other favorite players or teams, be sure to just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. When looking at South Carolina's men's basketball season and how it is unfolded to this point, there are a couple of notable winning streaks on the schedule, and the timing of these winning streaks' conclusions are quite interesting here. They either tell us a telltale sign of the team's collective endurance, or it is simply a mere coincidence. And you might be sitting there wondering, what on earth are you talking about when you say all that? Here's what I mean. South Carolina, they started the season 6-0, right? Won their first 6 games. Then they lost at Clemson, first loss of the season. They then turn around and won their next 6 games again. Then they lost at Alabama, won at Missouri, and lost versus Georgia at home. So they lost 2 out of their next 3 games. Then South Carolina turned around and went on a 7-game long winning streak in conference play. And obviously, that came to a crashing end this past week when they lost at Auburn this past Wednesday and against LSU at home this past Saturday, losing 2 games in a row for the first time all season. Now, you may notice the trend here. The trend here is this. South Carolina quite literally wins 6 or 7 games and then they drop a game. So the reason I bring all that up is this. Basketball obviously is a sport that is mainly built around conditioning. Obviously, you've got to have ball skills. You got to have ability to score. You got to have an ability to defend for 40 minutes in college basketball. But at the same time, the grind of the season gets to everyone at some point. And South Carolina, when you look at this roster and you look at the minutes distribution, this team pretty much runs an 8-man rotation. The guys that come off the bench are pretty much Josh Gray, a Jacoby Wright, and a Miles Studi. Sometimes you see a Morris Ugasuk get put out there on the floor if the guards need a bit of an extra reprieve, but otherwise, it's pretty much those 3 guys plus the entire starting lineup for South Carolina. Now, this is not me trying to set up an argument for why Lamont Paris needs to extend the rotation. I'm not going to say that he has to do that. I think that in college basketball especially, you can get away with running an 8-person rotation. Now, at the NBA level, I don't think you can get away with that because they play 48 minutes, and obviously, you're facing the best basketball players on the planet in that league. Not the same case in college basketball. But what I am getting at here is this. Running an 8-person rotation, at some point, you can sort of fall into certain mental lapses, especially after you've been winning for so long. When you win for so long, sometimes you do inevitably, whether you try to avoid it or not, reach a point where you kind of feel like you can get away with certain things that maybe if you were trying to bounce back from a loss per se, you wouldn't think you could get away with. So maybe your shot selection offensively is a great example. South Carolina, when they played Ole Miss specifically, in that second half, we all saw what happened. The Rebels put Jamarian Sharp, that 7'5" center, out there on the floor. South Carolina basically was terrified to drive to the basket for obvious reasons at that point, but they also kind of fell into a trap of starting to play a lot more isolation basketball. They stopped sharing the ball as much as they were before that substitution in the second half, and they started jacking up a lot of shots that, again, Lamont, he gives those guys a lot of freedom offensively, and this is not my way of saying I think he needs to change all that. I'm not saying that at all, but sometimes it will bite you because there are going to be some games where, despite the amount of experience this team has, they're going to fall into really bad habits in certain moments. In that game, South Carolina started taking some really bad shots offensively, and on the other end of the floor, they could not stop the Rebels off that pick and roll action from the top of the key. Jamarian Sharp basically was getting whatever he wanted, and that's how you wound up only winning that game by 3 points. I think you can see where I'm going with this. And then they turned around, and I forget what happened after the Ole Miss game, but I know obviously a week after that was when they played Auburn, and they lost at Auburn. Now remember, before they played Auburn, they played Vanderbilt at home. They were losing at halftime to Vanderbilt at home. That probably should have been a sign, looking back, that something like last week was coming, where at least the Auburn game was not going to go South Carolina's way. And the LSU game, look, let's be honest, LSU again, sure, they're not a great basketball team when you look at their record, but they do have some talented players. Jordan Wright's a good player. Jalen Cook, when he is healthy and playing for the Tigers, he is a good player. And so South Carolina, based on how long they've been playing, they hadn't had their bye week yet. This week is officially their bye week. So you could see how maybe the wear and tear started to accumulate over time. And then again, having that long losing streak, maybe it started to convince some of these guys that they could get away with certain things that, realistically speaking, you can't get away with consistently. So I'm not trying to say that 6-7 games is the magic number in terms of a winning streak for South Carolina. I'm not trying to say that at all. But here's the bright side. South Carolina, again, they have this bye week this week, so they got time to rest and recuperate, and also, they're going to be stewing over what happened last Saturday all week long leading into that Ole Miss game. So at the very least, the Gamecocks they're going to go into that game pissed off, okay? Let's just call it like it is. They're going to be really upset. They're going to be really angry. They're going to be motivated to go out there and prove to everybody that what they saw last week, that's not emblematic of the kind of team that they have. And then after that, they had just 4 games left. They play at Texas A&M versus Florida versus Tennessee, both those games at home, and at Mississippi State. That's their regular season finale for conference play and the regular season as a whole. Don't know why I said conference play to begin with, but I know some of you sitting there thinking that sounds pretty daunting. South Carolina could conceivably win all those games. You can make the argument. You could also make the argument that they could lose all those games. Literally, you could go both ways with it. But with a bye week that they have and what we have seen to this point in the season, just in terms of the winning streaks that they have compiled, I won't say South Carolina goes undefeated here, because trying to win 3 road games at Ole Miss, at Texas A&M, and at Mississippi State, I would say Mississippi State's the more notable home environment. The Hump is a tough place to play at no matter what. Obviously, that's going to be daunting, but I do think that there is reason to be optimistic that South Carolina can find their groove once again and end the regular season on a high note ahead of the SEC Conference Tournament and then the NCAA Tournament after that. But with that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Thank y'all so much for tuning in as always. I really appreciate each and every one of you watching or listening to today's show. What are your thoughts on what Shane Beamer has done with his coaching moves this offseason? Do you think that he could be replicating or trying to replicate what Jim Harbaugh did at Michigan a couple years ago when he was at a career crossroads with the Wolverines? What are your thoughts on the timing of these official visits that are being set up on the football recruiting front for this coming summer? And lastly, do you think that this is a potential trend, some of these losses that South Carolina has been handed this season, or do you think it's a mere coincidence? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or you can shoot me a direct message on X at @aline_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. But as always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.